She spilled, they laughed. He just lowered his eyes. No one knew what that quiet old man carried in his coat. The bell over the diner door gave a tired jingle, and morning light came in with the cold. Steam rose from coffee cups. Forks tapped plates. The radio behind the counter sifted out an old tune with brass and snare, one of those marching numbers they play before parades turned down so low it felt like memory more than music. Clara hurried past with 3 plates balanced on her arm. Short stack side of bacon and the veggie omelet, she said, breathless but smiling. "Careful there, Clara," a man at the counter called, the kind who liked to be heard. "Don't let that omelet join the pancakes on the floor." "Real comedian," his friend said. "We should tip him for the show." Clara's hand twitched. The coffee pot bumped a mug and sent a thin brown wave across the counter. It found the sleeve of the loud man's flannel. He jerked back, made a face as though scalded by insult more than heat. "Great," he said. "Just great." "I'm so sorry," Clara said. Napkins fluttered from the dispenser. "Here, let me." Laughter rolled along the counter like a cheap laugh track, too neat, too eager. A couple in a booth looked away. The fry cook turned a pancake with a little extra force, as if flipping the whole moment over. At the far end, Harold Miller sat with his back to the window, hat folded on the vinyl beside him, one hand around his mug. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't raise anything at all. Just lowered his eyes and watched a line of coffee creep toward the sugar caddy. "Hey, sunshine," the friend said to Clara, tapping a quarter on the counter. "Maybe stick to water. It's clear." Clara drew a breath, held it, let it out slow. "I'll get you a fresh cup, sir." "Sir," the man repeated, smiling at his buddy. "Hear that?" "She promoted me." Harold set his mug down. "You can use mine," he said, quiet enough that the sentence needed to be carried by the steam. "It's hot." "We're fine," the flannel said. "Finish your crossword, Grandpa." Harold went back to his coffee without a word, but the radio's snare seemed to tighten a notch, like a drummer sitting up straighter. Outside, a leaf tumbled, then stuck to the window, as if the glass had turned to old tape. Clara mopped the counter cheeks pink and poured fresh coffee. The bell jingled again, delivery man with a crate of eggs. A woman from the florist with something bright in tissue paper for the corner booth. The diner did what small-town diners do, it carried on. "Clara, you all right?" the owner called from the pass. "Fine," she said, light as foam. "Just breaking records." "Records?" She flashed a small grin toward the room, inviting them in on the joke. "Guess I'm batting 0 today." A couple of chuckles, kinder ones, rose from the booths. Even the fry cook's shoulders eased. Relief slid across the linoleum and hid under the stools. Harold folded the newspaper, stood, and lifted his coat from the back of the seat. The collar was worn smooth where hands remember. As he reached the row of wall hooks near the register, his cuff pulled back and something pinned to the inside lining caught a slice of autumn light. A flick no more than a breath, metal, waking up under a yellow bulb. Tyler, the busboy, saw it. Most people don't notice what the young notice: reflections. Secrets how a small town wears its pride. He paused with a gray tub of plates. "Need me to hang that for you, Mr. Miller?" "I've got it," Harold said. "You sure?" "Sure." He slipped the coat onto the hook, smoothed the sleeve, and went back to his stool. At the counter, the flannel man whispered without whispering. "He lives here right every morning with that same hat." "Same hat, same pie," his buddy said. "Man loves a routine." Clara poured Harold a refill. "Top you off, Mr. Miller?" "Thank you," he said. "You want the usual to go today?" "Not today." She nodded, the kind of nod that says there's a story sitting in the next booth if you're patient enough to hear it. The radio drifted to a softer tune, brass giving way to strings, the kind that used to play while you checked the mailbox at the end of a gravel drive. "Hey, Clara," the flannel called again, pointing at a smear she'd already wiped. "You missed a spot." "Looks clean to me," Tyler said before he could stop himself. The man swiveled. "Didn't ask the dish boy." Clara stepped between them with the practiced grace of someone who knows where tempers live in a room. "I've got it, Tyler." "Thanks." Tyler swallowed and lifted his tub. The plates inside clinked china, not anger. He glanced toward the wall hooks. The light found the coat again and drew a thin line across the inside seam. His brow knit not in suspicion, but recognition without words. Harold lifted his mug. The steam touched his face and something in his eyes softened old photographs in an attic window. He listened the way a man listens to his own house settling at night, counting the familiar sounds, spatula on grill knife on board the fizz of a soda gun, the hum of the neon open sign that never quite stops singing. "More cream?" Clara asked. "No," he said. "This is fine. Sugar fine as it is." She gave him that same small nod and left the little caddy where it sat, a tidy white square between his hand and the world. Two mail carriers came in blue shirts, chilled cheeks, talk of roots and early frost. "Cold snaps coming," one said. "Better dig out the good boots." "Tell that to my knees," the other answered. They took a booth. They said hello to Harold like you do in towns, where everyone used to stand in the same gym and clap for the same seniors. At the counter, the flannel man tried another joke and got fewer laughs. The room had shifted a degree, almost like a table leg had been wedged with a matchbook, and now the cups sat steady. Clara, Harold said, "Could you put that on my tab?" "What's that, Mr. Miller?" "The spill. The extra coffee. Whatever he needs. You don't have to." "I know." She watched him for a beat longer than necessary. "All right," she said, and wrote something simple on a pad. Not a charge. A note to herself to remember. Tyler slid past Harold toward the dish window. "You need anything else, Mr. Miller?" "I'm good, son." "Okay." Tyler hesitated. "Nice coat," old Harold said. "Old can be nice." Harold smiled at the idea, not the compliment. "Suppose it can." The bell jingled once more and a draft found the hooks. The coat swung just enough to let the lining breathe. Light skipped, landed, held. Tyler wasn't the only one who saw the glint this time. Clara's eyes flicked to it, then away, the way you look at a person's wedding ring and decide not to ask. Laughter tried to bloom again, at the counter thinner now. The radio's snare came back under the tune and tapped a quiet cadence, steady as a seasoned hand on a table. Harold finished his coffee, set down a tip that was generous without making a speech, and slid off the stool. He touched the brim of his hat out of habit and walked toward the hooks. The light shifted with him, a shy partner across a familiar floor. He reached for his coat. The camera would have lingered there if there'd been a camera on the row of hooks on the wool sleeve, parted just enough for a small, worn piece of metal to lift its face to the autumn sun and shine. "Kid, it's just an old badge, nothing more." Morning thinned into late morning, and the diner took on that steady hum it always did between breakfast rush and lunch. The radio had slid into an oldies station, soft guitars, brushed drums, a voice you could swear you'd heard at a county fair once upon a time. The bell over the door chimed at intervals, letting in little gusts of cold and the smell of damp leaves. Tyler drifted down the line of stools with a wet towel and a bus tub, wiping circles so clean They showed the faint ghost of the neon sign across from the window. He kept glancing toward the wall hooks. Harold's coat still hung there, sleeve parted just enough to promise a story. Curiosity in a 17-year-old doesn't rattle dishes, but it can make a room feel charged, the way the air does before snow. Clara slid a plate onto the pass. "Meatloaf special," she called, then lowered her voice as she stepped back to Harold. "You good on coffee?" "I am, thank you," Harold said. "Can I get you anything else? Toast pie?" "Just the coffee." Clara read the rest of his answer in the set of his eyes. She nodded and moved on. The two men from earlier had settled down to mutters about high school football and property taxes, safer topics where laughter didn't cut. When they did speak to Clara, they kept it short and she kept it kind. Tyler hovered by the hook's towel in hand. "Mr. Miller, you want me to move your coat to the end? Sun's hitting it." Harold looked up at the window and back to the hooks. "You can if you like." Tyler lifted the coat with careful fingers. The lining folded back as if to breathe in the warm air. There it was, small, round-edged, time-softened metal sewn into a neat pocket on the inside. No motto, no eagle or anchor, just a worn relief that caught the light like a secret. Tyler's hand paused mid-air. "What's that?" he asked, not quite touching it. "I mean, sorry, that's shiny." "Just an old badge," Harold said. "Nothing more." Tyler glanced toward Clara, then back to Harold. "It looks important." "Some things look that way," Harold said, voice easy. "Doesn't mean they are." Tyler laughed once, an uncertain sound. "You sound like my granddad when he's trying not to tell a fishing spot." Harold's mouth twitched. "Your granddad's smart sometimes." "Then listen to him." Tyler lowered the coat to the far hook where the sun was gentler, but his eyes stayed on the lining. "It's stitched in." "Stitched in on purpose." "Do you, want me to get a different hanger?" "Something that won't pull at it, that'd be fine." Tyler walked away, then walked back the way you do when you realize you forgot to say the thing you meant to say. "If you ever want it cleaned, I know a lady at the thrift who's good with old fabric. She's careful, like museum careful." "I'll remember," Harold said. Two women in postal blue stepped in and took a booth, shaking off the cold. "Lines around the block today," one said, rubbing her hands. "Everybody mailing Christmas before Thanksgiving like the calendar's chasing them." "Because last year's cards landed on New Year's," the other answered. "Half my route still has wreaths up from July." Clara topped their mugs and leaned on the friendly side of the counter. "You think it'll be as bad this season," Worst the first said, then caught herself and smiled. "But we'll get it there. We always do." The flannel man, trying for easy charm, now tapped his mug. "Then get my check there, too." Clara slid it over with a practiced grin. "First class all the way." "See," his buddy said, nudging him. "Be nice, you get jokes." Tyler reappeared with a plain wooden hanger, the kind that keeps wool honest. He lifted the coat again, and the little flash came and went like a wink from a streetlight at dusk. "You want me to—" "Go on," Harold said. Tyler swallowed, then reached inside. He didn't pull the badge free, only slipped a finger under the stitch line to check the weight, the way you might weigh an orange for sweetness. His eyes widened just a little. "It's heavier than it looks." "Old things often are," Harold said, "because of what they're made of, because of what they've carried." Tyler let the lining fall back. He turned the hanger sideways and eased the coat on. "You want me to keep an eye on it, just while you're here?" He tried to make it sound like a joke and failed. It came out like an offer. Harold studied him. The radio slipped into a march again. just a bar, just enough to straighten a man's shoulders if he wasn't careful. At the counter, the postal workers compared routes and laughed about a dog that refused to be friends with Saturdays. Clara passed, and the smell of fresh coffee moved with her. "Hold out your hand," Harold said. Tyler blinked. "Sir, your hand." Tyler set the bus tub on a stool and wiped his palm on his apron. He held it out steady, but not sure why. Harold reached inside the lining with the gentle efficiency of someone who knows the way stitches give when they know your touch. The badge came free into his palm with a quiet old metal sound. He closed his fingers around it and then opened them into Tyler's waiting hand. "It's just an old badge," Harold said again, softer. "Nothing more." Tyler looked down. Up close, the piece didn't shout. It had no polish left to brag with, only the soft glow of metal that had been handled more than shined. Edges rounded by years, not by design. A faint, nameless emblem that the eye wanted to name but didn't. He turned it slightly and watched the room tilt inside it, the booths, the pass. Clara's reflection sliding like light on a lake. "Why sew it in your coat?" he asked. "Safer than a pocket." "Pockets forget," Harold said. "Coats remember." Tyler smiled. "You talk like my English teacher wishes we all did." "She must be good." "She is." Clara leaned in, elbows on the counter near them. "Everything okay there?" She didn't ask about the badge, though. Her eyes had already made a note and filed it with care. "Just talking coats," Harold said. "I like that one," Clara said. "Looks like it's got stories. Some coats are better listeners than tellers." "Well, it fits right in here," she said, and moved on to a couple who wanted the meatloaf split with an extra plate. Tyler weighed the badge again, then glanced toward the men at the counter. Their jokes had softened into the kind of talk that stays put. The room felt different today, like someone had opened a window in a house you didn't realize was stuffy. "You want me to keep it for you, Mr. Miller?" Tyler asked, the words coming out quick to outrun his nerves. "While you're here, I'll put it somewhere safe. Not because it needs it, just because." Harold didn't answer for a beat. The bell chimed. A man in a wool cap came in with a stack of small packages, each wrapped in paper and twine. He said morning to no one and everyone, and set them by the register, with notes that read, "Mrs. Dunn Choir Raffle and for the Library Board, November meeting." "Where would you put it?" Harold asked. Tyler brightened like someone told to say what they really think. "We've got a little drawer by the pie case with the good pens and the guest book from the county fair pie contest. I could put it there. I'll sit right by it while I roll silverware. Nothing and nobody bothers that drawer." "Guest book's a good neighbor," Harold said. "I could sign it out." Tyler added, half teasing. "Like the library. One badge due back before closing." Harold's laugh was more air than sound. He looked at the badge, then at Tyler. The boy stood straight but not stiff, as if the radio's quiet cadence had found him too. "All right," Harold said. "You keep it a while." Tyler's face did a thing faces do when the thing they wanted, and the responsibility that comes with it, arrived together. He made a shelf of his hands, and Harold laid the badge there slow enough for Respect to have time to sit down. "I'll bring it back when you're ready," Tyler said. "I'm at this stool most mornings," Harold said. "Hard to miss." "I haven't, sir." One of the postal women passed on her way out, tucking a scarf deeper into her collar. "If your mailing cards do it this week," she told Clara. "We're running behind already." "Mine go out after choir potluck," Clara answered. "They get extra blessing that way." "Then they'll fly," the carrier said, and the bell gave her a kind farewell. Tyler walked to the pie case like a boy carrying a ring at a small-town wedding. He slid open the drawer, made room between the good pens and the guest book, and paused. He looked back at Harold, who nodded once. Tyler set the badge down like a promise and shut the drawer with a soft, wooden click. He returned to the counter lighter and taller somehow. "Should I, write it down?" "What would you write?" Harold asked. Tyler thought, then grinned. "Borrowed light." "Not bad," Harold said. The flannel man at the counter caught the tail end of that and shook his head, more amused than cruel now. "Kids," he said to his buddy, "everything's poetry." "Better that than complaining," his buddy said, and for once the room agreed with him without having to say so. Clara topped Harold's coffee without asking. She'd learned his answers. "The post office line is going to be something this year," she said, half to him, half to the world. "I should mail my cards today." "Do it after lunch," Harold said. "Lines are shorter when folks nap. You always know the hacks." "Just old," he said. "Old can be nice," she answered, and her smile reached past the counter to where Tyler was already rolling silverware beside the pie case, eyes darting now and then to the drawer, as if the good pens might try to wander off with his borrowed light. The radio wrapped the room in a melody that had crossed decades to get here. Outside, the wind shook a few more leaves loose. Inside, the hum of the place found a new note and held it. Tyler dried his hands and came back to Harold's stool. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" "For trusting me." Harold looked at the boy, then at the drawer, then back to his cup. "You looked like someone who would remember." "I will," Tyler said. He meant the drawer. He meant the badge. He meant more than he had words for. Clara called an order. The fry cook answered. Someone laughed at something gentle. The bell chimed for a man selling raffle tickets for the choir's coat drive. The day went on, but the center of it had shifted a fraction, like a picture straightened on a wall. Tyler's hand, empty now, hovered for a heartbeat over the drawer before he set it on the counter. His fingers pressed the wood as if he could feel the weight through grain. Close up, if there'd been a camera, the soft gleam of old metal resting beside a guest book, and the good pen's light pooling on its rounded edges, making the whole drawer glow. Some stories aren't meant to be told, just carried. The line hung between them, the way steam hangs over a fresh pour warm light, and gone if you breathe too hard. The diner had slipped into late afternoon. Shadows leaned long across the checkerboard floor. The radio kept to its oldies, a soft backbeat under plate scrape and quiet talk. From across the street, a faint chorus rose and fell, voices in a church hall working the same phrase until it fit like a well-worn coat. Tyler rolled silverware at the end stool, hands moving without needing his eyes. His eyes were on the pie case drawer. Every few minutes he slid it open, a careful inch, checked the good pens and the guest book, and closed it again like a secret handshake. He glanced at Harold, then at Clara, then back at Harold, as if timing mattered, and he hadn't been told when to ask. "Go on," Harold said at last, with a little smile that knew exactly what the boy would do. Tyler opened the drawer all the way. The badge lay where he'd left it, old metal quiet round edges catching only the light that wanted to be caught. He lifted it into his palm and brought it to Harold on both hands like a small, heavy bird. "Why is it heavy?" he asked, no stage in his voice now, just the straight sound of a question. Harold's gaze went to the window, then to the badge, then to Tyler. "Because it remembers. Remembers what Hans Harold said. Pockets. Years. People who never asked it to prove anything." Tyler turned the piece. In the metal, he saw the room bend, the counter, Clara wiping a water ring into a clean circle, the tip jar that chimed when someone dropped in coins, a reflection of his own face, unsure whether to be a kid or a steward. The bell jingled. Pastor Raymond came in with a gust of November air, and the smell of cold hymnals. He took off his cap and brushed the door grit from his sleeve. "Afternoon," he said to no one and everyone. The choir in the church hall stretched a last note and settled into talk. Their laughter reached the diner as a warm echo. "Afternoon," Pastor Clara called. "Coffee." "If it's a day with a sky," he said. "Black, please." Tyler hid nothing. He stood where he was, the badge cupped in his palm, and looked down again to decide whether he'd been given more than an object. Pastor Raymond paused, took in the scene the way men do, who have stood at doors long enough to tell what's inside a house before they knock. His eyes rested on the medal, then lifted to Harold. He didn't smile exactly. He did something rarer, he softened. "Looks like somebody found a reason to keep his hands still," the pastor said gently, accepting his cup from Clara. Tyler laughed under his breath. "I don't usually." "An honest confession," the pastor said. "Those are better than the other sort." At the counter, the men from the morning had returned with less thunder. They spoke of a local team's chances in the playoffs, of a roof that needed replacing, of how the town's Christmas lights went up earlier every year. One of them caught a glimpse of the badge and frowned as if a word had almost come to him, and then dodged behind a bush. "What is it?" he asked too loudly. "A token from the fair." Clara set his pie down with the good fork. "House rules," she said, cheerful and firm. "We don't ask about things we weren't invited to ask about." "Relax," he said, but not unkindly this time. "Just curious." "Me too." Tyler murmured the courage in him, not standing on toes, just standing. "But I can hold curious for a while." Harold nodded once, as if that answer pleased him more than brilliance ever could. The tip jar sang as the mail carrier from earlier dropped in change with a knuckle tap. For the coat drive, she said to Clara, and left a flyer with a choir bell printed in blue ink. "Tell folks Thursday night after rehearsal." "We will," Clara said, pinning the flyer beside the chalkboard menu. "We always do." Pastor Raymond carried his coffee to Harold's end of the counter. "You're well today, well enough," Harold said. "I heard your porch swing complain about the cold last night," the pastor said, smiling in the way that makes weather a kind of prayer. "She's loyal," Harold said. "Complains, but never quits. Like most good things," the pastor said. He looked again at the badge in Tyler's hand. "And that borrowed light," Tyler said before he could second-guess the poetry. The pastor let the phrase sit a moment. A useful kind. Tyler turned to Harold. "Do you want it back now?" Harold reached out. Tyler lifted his hands, ready to surrender. Harold didn't close his fingers. He set his palm beneath Tyler's, not touching the metal, only giving the air under it more steadiness. "You keep it a little longer," Harold said. Tyler blinked. "Really, until closing? What if somebody asks me?" "You say it's just an old badge," Harold said. Nothing more. Tyler nodded, not to obey, but as if agreeing to a contract both of them understood. He lowered the piece back into his own palm and held it the way you hold something you didn't earn, but mean to deserve. From the church hall, the choir tried a harmony that didn't sit right, then tried again. The second time it landed, and everyone in the diner could feel it, even those who didn't know why they felt better. The flannel man leaned toward his buddy. "He's got a trinket. Folks going soft over a trinket. Maybe let them," his friend said. "We all need a day to be soft." Clara poured Harold a refill without asking. "On the house," she said quietly. "You'll spoil me," he said. "That's the plan." The tip jar chimed again. Someone laughed at a joke that didn't cost anyone anything. The radio slid into a hymn arranged for radio brass pulled back voices up front. the kind of song that fills a kitchen more than a stadium. Pastor Raymond set his cup down and rested a hand on Harold's shoulder. It wasn't ceremony. It was the way a man steadies a ladder someone else is on. "Not every metal shines in the open," he said. Harold met his eyes and found there exactly as much understanding as he could stand, not a drop more. Tyler looked between them, a bridge that knew it was a bridge at last. "Pastor," he said, because the question needed to be asked by someone who would not use the answer as a weapon. "How do you know when something is worth carrying?" The pastor smiled. "When it makes you carry yourself better." Tyler looked down at his hands and adjusted his back without meaning to. The badge did not grow or glow. It simply sat, and because it sat, a boy stood taller. Evening began to edge the windows with a thin silver line. The bell chimed for the man with a sack of sweet potatoes for the potluck. The coat drive flyer caught a draft and crooked on its pin. Clara straightened it with a finger. The men at the counter paid and left a tip that made the jar sing 2 notes. On their way out, one of them paused by Harold and said without looking him in the eye, "Good pie." "Best in town," Harold said. They went, and with them a thickness in the air went too. "Closing's in an hour," Clara said to Tyler. "I'll bring it back then," Tyler said, eyes on the badge. "Bring yourself too," Harold said. "Both are wanted." Pastor Raymond put his cap back on and gathered the church keys. "We'll leave the hall lights on a little, Clara, so the choir flyers show in the window." "They show already," she said. "It's that kind of night." The pastor gave Harold's shoulder one last squeeze and left with the sound of his boots honest against the mat. The choir began again, the chord now sure enough to trust. When the last table was wiped and the last cup warmed for the road, Harold walked home the 2 blocks he always walked, hat pulled low against the new wind. His porch swing greeted him with its friendly complaint. He sat the boards under him old enough to know his weight. In the distance, a bell rang, time for people who didn't need a clock, to tell them when to sit down and be grateful. Across town, or near enough to be seen, if you stood on Harold's porch and leaned, Tyler stood under the diner's front light, the badge in his palm catching what the day had left and giving it back without fuss. He looked toward the street that led to Harold's house like a boy memorizing a route he would take when asked. The camera would have found them both if there had been a camera. Harold on the porch swing. A shadow of a smile where the radio in the kitchen kept company with the kettle. Tyler at the window by the pie case, the badge in his hand, evening light pouring over old metal, as if it could read it like a page. And somewhere between them, the choir held a final note that settled the town, and the tip jar in the closed diner remembered the last coin's ring. He set the badge down, and silence fell. Evening wrapped the diner in an amber hush, the kind that comes after a long parade when the streets are swept and the brass has cooled. Veterans Day banners still clung to the lampposts outside, their edges lifting and dropping with the wind. Inside the grill hissed soft, and somewhere in the radio, a piano threaded a melody through clinks of china and low talk. Tyler stood at the pie case with his hands clean and his eyes bright. Harold sat at his usual stool hat, parked beside his cup. "Mr. Miller," Tyler said, voice steady now that he'd rehearsed it to himself. "You want it back?" Harold looked at the boy and nodded once. "I reckon it's time." Tyler slid open the drawer. He lifted the badge with both palms like passing a candle you don't want to flicker. It wasn't shiny. The day had been wearing its light down to a warm core, but the metal remembered how to hold it. Tyler crossed the floor slowly. The chatter dimmed without being asked. The 2 men from the morning were there again, softer around the edges than before. They watched with the kind of attention you give to a story you didn't mean to hear, but can't stop listening to. Careful, one of them muttered, trying on a smile. Might be a prize from the county fair. Tyler didn't answer. He reached the counter and stopped. Harold turned on his stool to face the room, not making a speech, not making anything. He stood. His back found its old height without folding its years. He extended his hand. Tyler placed the badge there and stepped back. Clara hovered nearby with a clean towel that had no job to do. Pastor Raymond had come in just ahead of the dinner lull and taken a corner booth. Now he sat with his hands around his coffee, an attentive witness. He and Harold shared one of those nods men trade when words would crowd the thing that doesn't need them. Harold looked down at the old medal for the length of a breath. Then he set it on the counter. Not in a line with the salt and pepper like decoration. Not behind his cup like a secret still hiding. He set it where every eye could fall on it if they wished, and where no one would be forced to look if they didn't. The piece made the quietest sound a badge can make, an old coin greeting would, and then it simply was. That was when the laughter tried to be born. The flannel man, nerves reaching for their oldest trick, let out a short chuckle that dragged its feet. "Well, look there," he said, too loud for the room we had become. "Grandpa's got a souvenir. Show and tell, huh?" "Maybe it came with the coat," his friend added, and gave him the side grin men use when they aren't sure who they are in a story yet. The piano and the radio seemed to pause between chords. Clara's towel stilled. Tyler's fingers curled and then let go of themselves. Outrage rose, but it didn't flare. It lifted like weather does, certain steady a pressure you feel in your teeth. Harold didn't reach for the badge. He didn't reclaim it or push it toward anyone. He simply stood beside it. He let it mean exactly what it meant, no more, and the room had to face that measure. And then a chair scraped back from a corner booth. It was not a dramatic scrape. It was a practical sound, boots on tile, wood against wood. 4 men had taken that booth after the dinner rush, quiet in plain shirts, their jackets folded neatly, their conversation low. If you were the sort to notice, you'd have noticed their posture, the way they let a wall find their backs, the way they listened to a room without looking like they were listening. If you were the sort to ask, you wouldn't have had to. The town had already muttered it, a small team, stopping through nothing to see, nothing to announce. People had left them alone like you do for folks who carry long miles. The first of them stood. He faced Harold. His friends rose with him, a sequence, not a scatter. The flannel man's grin dissolved like sugar left on a plate too long. Clara's towel slipped to the counter without a sound. Pastor Raymond didn't move except for his eyes, which said amen without needing church. The men at the booth lifted their hands to their brows and held a clean line. It was not theatrical. It was not borrowed from a movie. It was the kind of salute that knows what it says and doesn't say it twice. In that small diner, under the buzz of an old neon sign and the thin, steady breath of a radio piano, it was the loudest quiet anyone had ever heard. The room froze in place as if waiting for a name to be spoken, and finding that none was required. A couple at the window stopped mid-fork. The mail carrier on her way out put her palm on the door and didn't push. Even the fry cook's spatula paused mid-air like a metronome that had remembered something. Harold didn't return the salute. He stood by the badge he had placed in the open and let the honor stop with him and pass through him at the same time. It was a moment shaped like a threshold. Tyler's breath found his chest again. He looked at the men and then at Harold and then at the badge, and he made a tiny motion with his chin that only the pastor and Clara saw, a boy acknowledging a truth and promising to carry it. The flannel man cleared his throat to say something and did not say it. He put his hand on his coffee cup, then took it away, then put it back, as if it weighed more than coffee should. Piano notes found their way back into the radio's air, a little wider now, like a hymn someone had quietly smuggled into the playlist. Outside, the banner on the light pole lifted once and fell into stillness. After a breath long enough to count a life and short enough not to claim it, the men lowered their hands. The one nearest Harold stepped forward 3 paces, not into another man's space, only toward it. He didn't offer a name, and Harold didn't ask. They shared a look that had more to do with years than with rank. The man reached out and tapped the counter once near the badge, a small, respectful sound in the spot where Harold's old medal rested. Then he returned to his booth. Only then did the diner remember how to move. Clara's eyes were wet. She set her towel down like something holy and put her palm flat on the wood, near the badge, not touching it, only standing beside it, the way Harold had. Her voice came out careful. "Anyone need warm-ups?" A murmur rose, the kind that doesn't disturb. The mail carrier let herself out and wiped a cheek with the back of her glove on the sidewalk. The flannel man stared at his hands. He opened his mouth once and closed it again. His friend exhaled a long breath that took 2 years out of his shoulders and left something better. Pastor Raymond rose and came to the counter. He didn't make a speech. He set a folded flyer for the coat drive beside the badge, slid it just so, and then looked at Harold with that same folded words expression. "Evening," he said, as if it had just arrived, and he wanted to greet it properly. "Evening," Harold said. Tyler found himself at Harold's elbow without deciding to go there. "Sir," he whispered, "'cause whispers are for not breaking things. Do you want me to—" "Leave it," Harold said, gentle. Tyler left it. Across the room, one of the men from the booth, "If you'd needed a label, you could have whispered Navy SEALs, and the town would have nodded," lifted his water glass toward Clara, in a way that said thank you for the quiet, more than for the drink. She nodded back and brought over the pot, as if that were the most honorable request in the world. The flannel man finally spoke, but not to Clara and not to the room. He spoke toward the badge without presuming it would answer. "Aye," he said, then stopped. He shook his head once. "Pie's good." "Best in town," Harold said, and for a heartbeat the old line landed like a blessing instead of a habit. The pastor's eyes went to Tyler. He gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, the kind a teacher gives a student who has shown his work without turning in a paper. Tyler stood straighter. He wasn't older than yesterday, not really, but he carried himself as if gravity had been taught a better way to be. The radio's pianist let a chord bloom and resolve. The neon hummed the way it always had, except now everyone could hear it, the same way you hear a clock after the house has quieted for a necessary reason. Clara reached for Harold's cup. Her hand trembled and then didn't. She set the pot down, and with a motion that was half habit and half prayer, placed her hand lightly on the counter near his. "Thank you," she said, eyes bright, voice even. "For what? For letting us see you as you are." "I didn't do much," Harold said. "Sometimes not hiding as much," she answered. He considered that, then nodded once. The men in the corner finished their meals without hurry. They paid with cash, signed nothing, and left a tip heavy enough to make the jar sing 2 notes. On their way out, the first of them paused just long enough to touch the brim of an invisible cap. Not a salute now. Something smaller that ordinary people are allowed to return. Harold dipped his head. The man went, and the bell over the door rang the same way it always does when somebody leaves more behind than they carry. The room breathed. Veterans Day banners ticked on their poles outside. Somewhere a child asked a parent what had happened in the diner, and the parent said, "Something good," and that was accurate enough. Tyler wiped an invisible crumb from the counter. The badge lay small and unarguable in its pool of lamplight. The night had a new center, and it was exactly the size of a palm. Pastor Raymond set his empty cup down, and the sound it made was final, without being an end. He gave Harold one last nod, the kind you can carry home and unpack when the house is quiet. The hush didn't vanish so much as it settled in like a quilt pulled up after the lamp is out. Clara's eyes were still bright. She placed her fingers on the counter near the badge again, not to claim it, but to respect the space it had made. Relief moved through the room like warm air from a kitchen door, and the camera, if there had been a camera, would have lingered the way everyone else did on that badge in the yellow light metal, worn to the softness of memory, holding steady while the whole diner, the whole street, the whole little town held still with it. No one laughed now. The badge still rested where Harold had set it, lamplight warming its softened edges. The piano on the radio thinned to a high-held note that felt like breath taken in and not yet let out. Conversations that had started to knit themselves back together after the salute unraveled again, only this time into quiet. Clara wiped a circle on the counter that didn't need wiping, and left the towel where it fell, palm flattening against the varnished wood near the badge as if to keep the room from tipping. The flannel man stared at his coffee as though the swirl on top might tell him what to do. His buddy's hands closed around his own mug and stayed there, steadying himself on something warm. Harold didn't move to pocket the metal. He stood with his hat beside his cup, eyes level, letting the moment belong to the town that had to decide what it wanted to be. Pastor Raymond stepped forward, not to the center of anything, just far enough that people could take their bearings off him. He didn't clear his throat. He didn't ask permission. He did what men with keys to church basements do when someone has left a light on. He made sure we noticed what mattered. Friends, he said a word big enough to fit everyone without measuring them. We don't always get a second chance to answer a question we wish we'd answered better. Tonight we do. He looked at Harold and held that look just long enough to make it blessing, not spotlight. Then he turned to the room. 1 minute he said, soft like a suggestion that had already been accepted. For the ones who served and for the times we forgot to say thank you. Clara glanced toward the door. Outside, the choir in the church hall had spilled onto the steps for air. Their voices drifted back under the wind, not a full song, just scales and a line of harmony finding itself again. The sound reached the diner like a hand through a doorway. Tyler set his bus tub aside and stood up straight. He looked at Harold, then at the badge, then at the men in the corner booth who had saluted, and his chin lifted by a fraction he didn't plan. The flannel man stood. Not fast. His chair feet whispered on the tile, an apology with edges rubbed off. He turned toward Harold, and then away, and then back, as if learning the steps to a dance that required sincerity. Color rose in his face and stayed there. "Sir," he said, and the word fit in his mouth awkwardly at first, and then better. "I was out of line." Harold's eyes were kind without being easy. He gave the man a single nod, which is how a small town accepts amends when the amends are truly offered. The buddy stood too. He swallowed once. "I'm sorry as well," he said. "We were—" He stopped searching, thoughtless. Clara's voice entered there gentle as a hand on a doorknob. "Thank you," she said to them both. She pointed her chin toward the clock by the pie case. "Let's take that minute now." She didn't set a timer. Nobody needed one. The radio softened itself without being asked. Somewhere outside, the choir's pitch pipe gave a polite beep and then hush. Inside, forks settled on plates. The spatula found a place to rest. People stood not like a theater audience obeying a cue, but like neighbors discovering they know how to move together. Pastor Raymond bowed his head. The men from the corner booth straightened as if their spines had memorized this. The mail carrier halfway to the door let it swing closed, and stayed. Even the owner in the pass window lifted his cap and let the kitchen catch its breath. Tyler watched Harold. Harold watched the badge. The badge watched no one and everyone. Silence filled the chairs and the spaces between them. It wasn't the awkward silence from earlier, the kind that waits for a joke to rescue it. It was the kind that holds names you can't say without breaking, and therefore don't. It was coats folded over pews. It was letters stamped and sent. It was a porch swing complaining under winter and still doing its job. It was all the small, faithful things towns do when nobody claps. A minute is longer than you think when you give it away. The bell over the door clicked as the wind tried it once and failed. The neon hummed its old hum. The choir outside, now on the steps, hummed with it, as if the diner's sign and the church's singers had found the same key. When the minute passed, because time does what it's hired to do, people breathed out together. Pastor Raymond lifted his head. He didn't say amen. The room had already done it. The flannel man crossed the few steps to Harold. He didn't put out his hand right away. He looked at the badge and then at Harold's face and then at the pastor's shoes, gathering courage in a circle. Finally, he offered his hand like a man offers his hat in a place that deserves it. "I'm sorry," he said again simpler. "Thank you." Harold shook his hand once. "All right," he said, which in our town is both pardon and pact. Clara wiped her eyes with her wrist and tried a laugh that didn't quite make it. "Dinner's on us tonight," she told Harold. "You don't have to do that," Harold said. "I know," she said. "We want to." "Then I'll let you," he said, and the corner of his mouth moved in the direction of a smile. The men from the booth, those quiet travelers who had made the loud quiet, stood again this time, not with their hands at their brows, but with their hands at their sides, ordinary and at ease. One of them stepped toward the counter. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. He slipped a folded bill beneath the tip jar without letting the jar sing about it. The jar clinked anyway, a modest chime that landed like a thank you note. Tyler drifted close. He looked at Harold as if awaiting orders that didn't sound like orders. Harold looked at the badge as if it had given him back something he hadn't realized he missed, room to stand. "You keep it?" Tyler asked, catching himself, then correcting. "I mean, do you want me to?" Harold placed a finger on the metal in thought. He looked to Clara, then to the register, then to the window where the choir's voices traced vowels into the evening. "Clara," he said, "could you mind it a while?" She blinked. "Mind it?" "Not behind glass," he said. "Not yet. Just there." He tapped the wood to the right of the register, where a little patch of counter had always been a place for found gloves and forgotten sunglasses and notes to neighbors who'd be by after supper. Where people can see it if they happen to be looking. Where it doesn't ask them to. Clara swallowed. "I can do that." Tyler smiled at the choice. "Borrowed light," he said under his breath, as if returning a library book and checking it out again in the same motion. The flannel man stepped back to his stool lighter now, as if he'd set down something nobody could see. His buddy let out a breath and found a better posture for it to live in. The mail carrier finally opened the door. Cold air came in with a chord of the choir that felt like peppermint and paper. "Coat drives Thursday," the carrier said, half to Clara, half to the whole place. "Bring what you can." "We will," Clara said, and meant more than coats. The owner leaned out of the pass. "Harold," he said, voice thick, "take a slice home. No arguing." "What's good?" Harold asked, though every pie here had a life story. "Pecan," Clara said. "Always pecan on a day when people remember." Harold nodded. "Pecan it is." Pastor Raymond set 2 fingers against the counter near the badge and closed his eyes for what might have been a second, or might have been the tail of the minute we'd already given. When he opened them, he looked at Tyler. "Keep doing what you did," he said. "It suits you." "I will," Tyler said, and stood up even straighter without having to think about it. Clara picked up the badge. "Not like curators do not like burglars do, but like daughters do when they're sorting a father's drawer, knowing the value of things no appraiser can appraise." She placed it at the register in the little square Harold had indicated. The metal took the light and gave it back, and the counter looked suddenly like it had always been waiting for exactly that. Outside, the choir slipped gently from warm-ups into the first careful verse of Eternal Father Strong, to save not belted, just carried in the air by people who sing to keep their balance. The sound threaded the open moment and tied a knot that would hold. Clara slid a plate toward Harold. "On the house," she said again, and this time the laugh made it through. He lifted his fork. "Best in town," he said, and now it was a promise, not a line. Tyler stood near the register and watched the badge hold its place as if it had been given a job with no end date. He looked at Harold, who looked back, and in that glance they both saw where the next part of the story would need to be told. If there'd been a camera, it would have followed Clara's hand as she adjusted the napkin beside the register, making room the way you make room at a table when you expect company. It would have found the badge in its small new home a few inches from a jar of peppermint sticks and a dish of pennies for tacks shining without trying under a warm lamp. And then it would have waited with the rest of us for what would happen when a town decides to remember out loud. A quiet life remembered forever. The town library smelled like paper and lemon oil with a hint of wool from winter coats shrugged onto chairbacks. Afternoon light came through the tall windows in soft slices, catching dust like tiny snow. On the far wall between a framed map of the county and a shelf of local histories, a new shadow box waited, simple oak, clean glass, a small brass plate beneath it. Inside lay the badge, centered on dark blue felt, its worn edges warm under a pale sun. Clara stood near the end of the aisle with a program in her hand. Tyler hovered beside the lectern, hair combed, tie not quite straight, fingers worrying the edge of his note card until Pastor Raymond touched his wrist and the fidget stilled. Harold sat in the front row, hat on his knees, the same posture he wore at the counter when he listened more than he spoke. "Friends." Pastor Raymond began the word, fitting easily in the room we gather to do something quiet and sturdy. His eyes found Harold, then slid to the oak frame. "We are here to place a small, faithful thing where it can keep doing its work." He nodded to Clara. She stepped forward and lifted the cloth that had covered the shadow box, folding it as if it were a table napkin in her own diner. A murmur moved through the room, recognition without spectacle. The badge under glass seemed not displayed, but rested. The pastor read the brass plate aloud, voice even. "Borrowed light, placed in gratitude by the town of Miller's Run, Veterans Day, season 2022. He smiled at Tyler. "Young Mr. Tyler named it so." Tyler cleared his throat. He tried again, found the pitch he'd practiced. "I called it that because it made me stand straighter, and because the light didn't belong to me." He looked at Harold, then the case. It belonged to what it remembers. The room was full and gentle, a choir director with a folder tucked to her chest. The mail carrier in her blue, the fry. Cook in a shirt. Without his apron, 2 of the men from the corner booth standing in the back, faces, plain eyes, steady. The owner from the diner edged in as if he might still need to stir something. The flannel man, clean-shaven today, hair combed like he was presenting a science fair project from long ago, stepped into the aisle. He didn't get behind the lectern. He didn't ask the pastor for a turn. He faced Harold with his hands open at his sides. "Sir," he said the word, fitting better now, "I was wrong." He glanced at the crowd, then back. "I said it last night, and I say it here. Where it counts. I'm sorry." Harold stood not taller than anyone but tall enough for himself. "All right," he said, and the pastor, who knew the dialect of truth, nodded once. The man took a seat with his buddy, the kind of seat that welcomes you back when you've walked the long way around to it. Clara stepped up on cue, written nowhere. "We kept it by the register," she said, soft. "For folks to see if they were looking. It helped." She pressed her lips together and smiled toward Harold. "It keeps helping," Pastor Raymond said. Tyler moved to the lectern, his note card steady now. He looked at the badge, then down. "This is a quiet thanks," he read, "for the ones who carry more than they say, for the ones who teach by standing still, for the ones who show us where to put our hands when we don't know what to do with them." He raised his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Miller." Harold's hand touched the brim of his hat, an old habit offering back what it had been given. He glanced to the case. The badge seemed to glow without glowing metal, remembering how to hold a room together. Pastor Raymond closed his notes without looking at them. "We'll keep this here," he said, "by the local histories and the county map, so folks can find their way to it, while they're finding their way to everything else." He gestured toward the open stacks. "No ropes, no fuss, just a shelf that knows its job." The small crowd eased into a minute that wasn't announced. No one needed to be told how to stand. Somewhere in the back, a cell phone hummed a familiar old tune, the same brass and snare number on the diner's radio played. "The Morning We Met Them All." Its owner fumbled it quiet, but the melody had already done its bit, stitched the day to the first page. After the handshakes and the paper cups of lemonade and the awkward compliments had gently worn themselves out, Harold stood before the case. He looked at the badge as if speaking to a friend who didn't require chatter. Clara came to his side. "You sure you don't want it at the diner?" she whispered. "It'll get more rest here," he said, "and more readers." "Readers." He tipped his head toward the shelves. "People come to learn something. This is a good aisle for learning." Tyler joined them, eyes shining with the kind of pride that doesn't make noise. "We'll dust the glass," he said. "I know you will," Harold said. The flannel man approached, hat in hand this time, because he'd brought one empty out of respect. "If you want me to fix the squeak on your swing," he said. "I can." "I know hinges." Harold thought a beat. "Squeak reminds me I'm sitting," he said. "But you can look." The man grinned, surprised into it. "Yes, sir." They drifted out in twos and threes. The choir director pressed a small photocopied hymn into Clara's hand and said, "For the register," then thought about it and added, "for the wall by the coffee pots." The mail carrier promised to move the library up one stop on her morning route for a week. The two quiet men in the back slipped away like they'd come, leaving the space warmer than they found it. Evening gathered itself on the street. Harold walked home slow, the way men walk when the air is light and the road knows their shoes. He climbed his porch steps. The swing greeted him with its friendly complaint. He sat and let the boards learn his weight again. Through the open kitchen window, his radio found that same old melody from the first morning, brass softer, now more air in the drum. The tune threaded the porch and the yard, and whatever part of the sky belongs to a town that just did a good thing. Clara and Tyler came by with a paper sack pecan pie wrapped for later, with a note in Clara's handwriting, "On the house still." They stood at the bottom of the steps and didn't insist on a visit. "You did right," Clara said. "I did little," Harold said. "Little is often right," she answered. Tyler looked up the steps. "We'll remember, sir," Harold leaned back the swing, talking kindly. "That's all a man can hope for," he said, and closed his eyes the way you do when listening is easier in the dark. The wind moved in the maple, not rushing, just turning pages. The radio inside eased itself lower until it was more memory than music again. The badge a few blocks away under glass held the last of the sun, and the library settled around it like a story taking its proper shelf. A hush settled the town the way library light settles dust coats on chairbacks, a quiet refill at the diner. Harold's porch swing easing into the evening, while the choir's echo drifted through. In a small oak frame, the worn badge held borrowed light for anyone passing the local histories, reminding them that one steady act can turn outrage into amends, and amends into habit. The lesson was plain as a lamp in a winter window: give kindness expecting nothing, and don't mistake a quiet posture for an empty life. So the board approved a standing tribute, and the register kept its gentle space, and folks remembering that night carried themselves better in lines at tables and under church doors. Carry the light, judge less.